If you inherited $4 billion the same week your husband left you for your best friend, what would you do? Eve didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't beg them to stay. Instead, she did something far more devastating. She bought the companies they worked for, became their boss, and quietly, methodically, dismantled their lives piece by piece, without them ever knowing who was pulling the strings. Until the night she walked into a ballroom in a crimson dress and $10 million in diamonds, and they finally understood who they'd betrayed. This is her story, and it will make you question everything you think you know about power, revenge, and justice. Eve sat beside her dying father in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and endings. December 20th. The machines beeped their steady rhythm while Noah Harrison's breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Outside the window, New York City prepared for Christmas. Lights twinkling, people laughing, life continuing as if the world wasn't ending. Her phone buzzed. A text from William. I am working late tonight. Don't wait up. Eve stared at the message. Her father was dying, and her husband was where? With colleagues. With clients. The excuse had become so familiar she'd stopped questioning it. Noah's hand suddenly gripped hers with surprising strength. His eyes opened, urgent and afraid. Eve, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the machines. Listen carefully. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. The key, in my office drawer, the old oak desk. He coughed, struggling for air. Safety deposit box 447. At the bank on Tillery Street. His grip tightened. You'll understand everything. Dad, what? Promise me. His eyes locked on hers with an intensity she'd never seen. Promise you'll go. Promise you'll be strong. I promise, Eve whispered, tears streaming down her face. Noah's hand went slack. The monitor's steady beep became a single, endless tone. He was gone. Eve sat frozen, her father's cryptic words echoing in her mind. What safety deposit box? What secrets had her quiet, humble father, a man who drove a 15-year-old sedan and clipped coupons every Sunday, kept from her all these years? She had no idea that in 5 days, her entire life would explode. 3 days later, everything changed again. The funeral had been small and simple, the way Noah would have wanted it. 30 people in a Brooklyn chapel, sharing stories about a man who'd lived modestly and loved quietly. Charlotte, Eve's best friend, had held her hand throughout the service, whispering reassurances. William had stood in the back, checking his phone. Now, on December 23rd, William walked through their apartment door at 7 in the evening. He didn't remove his coat. He didn't ask how she was doing. He simply placed a manila envelope on the kitchen counter and said, "We need to talk." Eve looked up from her father's photo albums, her eyes red from crying. "What is it?" "Divorce papers." William's voice was flat, emotionless. "I'm done, Eve. I've been unhappy for years." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Years," she repeated, barely comprehending. "My father just died 3 days ago." "I know the timing isn't great," William interrupted, loosening his tie. "But I can't keep pretending. I want out." Eve stood slowly, her legs unsteady. No comfort, no empathy, just cold calculation from the man she'd loved for 8 years. The man she'd married believing he'd be there through everything. "You couldn't wait? Not even a week?" William had the decency to look away. "There's something else." Something in his tone made Eve's blood run cold. "Charlotte and I." He paused. We're together. We're getting married. The room tilted. Charlotte. My Charlotte. We didn't plan for it to happen, William said, as if that mattered. But it did. We're getting married on Christmas Eve. Charlotte, her best friend, the woman who'd held her at her father's funeral, the woman who knew every secret, every fear, every dream, the woman who'd been in their home, at their dinner table, sharing wine and laughter while secretly planning to steal Eve's husband. Christmas Eve, 2 days away. While Eve grieved her father, they'd been planning a wedding. The betrayal carved deeper than any wound Eve had known. She stood there, numb and shattered, while William placed a pen on top of the divorce papers and walked out the door. But what William and Charlotte didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Eve's father had left her something that would change everything. My mom has supported every dream I've ever had. When I told her about this channel, her eyes lit up. I promised her 1,000 subscribers before she turns 60 next February. I can't reach that without you. Please, help me keep my word. Hit subscribe. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Desperate and alone, Eve finally remembered her father's words. That night, she went to his modest Brooklyn house, the house where she'd grown up, where Noah had raised her after her mother died when Eve was 12. The house that always smelled like coffee and old books. She found the old oak desk in his study. The key was exactly where he'd said it would be, taped underneath the top drawer. A small brass key with a tag, Box 447, Tillery Street. The next morning, Christmas Eve morning, while Charlotte and William prepared for their wedding, Eve drove to the bank Noah had mentioned only once, years ago. She'd forgotten he'd even mentioned it until now. The vault manager, an older woman with kind eyes, led Eve down to the basement. The safety deposit boxes lined the walls like secrets waiting to be discovered. Box 447 was larger than most. The manager left her alone. Eve inserted the key with trembling hands. Inside, her entire understanding of reality shattered. Corporate documents, stock certificates, property deeds, dozens of them, spanning decades. Legal papers establishing trusts, holding companies, investment portfolios. And on top of everything, a handwritten letter in her father's careful script. My darling Eve, it began. Eve sank into the chair, her hands shaking as she read. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you these things while I was alive. I wanted you to grow up valuing character over wealth, people over possessions. I wanted you to become the woman you are, kind, genuine, and hard-working, without the corruption that money can bring. But now you need to know the truth. I wasn't just a retired accountant who lived simply. I built an empire. For 40 years, I invested, acquired, and grew a portfolio that now represents $4.2 billion in assets. Media companies, real estate holdings across 6 states, venture capital funds, technology startups, all of it hidden under layers of trusts and holding companies. I lived in a modest house and drove an old car because I wanted to, because those things didn't matter to me. What mattered was building something that would protect you, that would give you power and choices when I was no longer here to do it myself. It's all yours now, Eve. Every dollar, every company, every asset. Use it wisely. Trust carefully. Love fearlessly. You are stronger than you know. Don't let anyone make you forget that. All my love, Dad. Eve sat in that cold vault for an hour, holding her father's letter, while her hands trembled and her mind raced. The man who clipped coupons and bought day-old bread was a billionaire. The father who'd taught her to save and budget had been a financial genius building an empire in secret. He'd done it all for her. To protect her. To give her power. And now, hours before her husband married her best friend, Eve had become one of the wealthiest women in America. She drove home in a daze, her father's words echoing in her mind. That evening, while Charlotte walked down the aisle in a white dress and William smiled like he'd won something, Eve sat alone in her father's house, surrounded by his frugal belongings, the 15-year-old sedan in the garage, the clipped coupons still on his kitchen counter, the simple furniture he'd never replaced. Her phone filled with photos. Charlotte had the audacity to text them to her. The ceremony. The kiss. The celebration. Each image was a knife twisting deeper. But something was happening inside Eve. The grief and shock were hardening into something else. Something cold and calculating. She wasn't crying. She wasn't breaking down. She was thinking, planning, seeing possibilities in her father's fortune that had nothing to do with luxury or comfort. Power, she realized, could be used for more than just living well. It could be used strategically. By New Year's Day, Eve had made 3 phone calls that would set everything in motion. The first call went to Diane Porter, a forensic accountant recommended by her father's lawyers. "I need a complete audit of my portfolio," Eve said. "Every company, every asset, every connection. And I need it done quietly." The second call went to Marcus Chen, a corporate attorney known for his discretion. "I'm inheriting a significant estate," Eve explained. "I need someone who can help me understand what I own, and who can act on my behalf without revealing my identity." The third call went to Ray Sullivan, a private investigator whose card she'd found in her father's desk. "I need detailed information about 2 people," Eve said, her voice steady. "Everything about their professional lives, their employers, their colleagues. Everything." She gave him William's and Charlotte's names. By mid-January, Eve's team had assembled in her father's modest study. 3 professionals, sworn to absolute secrecy through ironclad confidentiality agreements, all slightly puzzled by the quiet woman with billions at her disposal who still lived in her father's old house. "What exactly are we looking for?" Diane asked, her laptop open, spreadsheets glowing. "Connections," Eve said simply. "I want to know if my father's portfolio intersects with certain people's lives." Ray Sullivan slid a folder across the desk. "William Hartley, CEO of Meridian Marketing Group, 38 years old. Annual salary $450,000 plus bonuses. Company's been struggling lately. Lost 2 clients last quarter. He's under pressure from the board." "And Charlotte?" Eve asked, her voice betraying nothing. "Charlotte Pierce, creative director at Vanguard PR Agency. 36 years old. Salary $180,000. Rising star in the industry. Won several awards. Ambitious. Recently married to William Hartley on Christmas Eve." Eve nodded slowly. "Thank you. Now, Diane, tell me about my father's companies." 2 weeks later, Diane walked into Eve's father's study with a file that made Eve smile for the first time since Noah died. "Your father," Diane said, spreading documents across the desk, "was extraordinarily strategic about his investments. He preferred controlling stakes in mid-sized companies, companies large enough to be profitable but small enough that he could influence their direction." "Go on," Eve said, leaning forward. "Among his holdings are 2 companies that might interest you." Diane pulled out highlighted organizational charts. Meridian Marketing Group and Vanguard PR Agency. Eve's pulse quickened. Tell me more. Your father's trusts own 51% of Meridian and 48% of Vanguard. Controlling stakes in both cases. The ownership is buried under layers of holding companies. Harrison Ventures, Titan Capital Holdings, several others. Neither company's leadership knows who the actual majority stakeholder is. It's all managed through intermediaries and board representatives. Eve stared at the charts. Her father owned the companies where William was CEO and Charlotte worked as creative director. They had no idea. Nobody had any idea. It was perfect. Marcus Chen cleared his throat. What are you thinking? Eve looked up, her eyes sharp and focused. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that I'd like to attend the next board meetings for both companies. Anonymously, of course. As a board representative for the majority stakeholder. Marcus nodded. That can be arranged. Ray Sullivan studied Eve carefully. What's your endgame here? Eve picked up her father's letter, reading the words again. My father taught me that true power is quiet. That it doesn't announce itself. She looked at her team. William and Charlotte took everything from me when I was at my weakest. They thought I was broken, helpless, someone to be discarded. She placed the letter down. I'm going to show them what real power looks like. And they'll never see me coming. That night, Eve drafted her first anonymous directive to the board of Meridian Marketing Group. The game had begun. The first strike came in mid-January. Through Marcus Chen, acting as legal representative for the majority stakeholder, Eve issued a directive to Meridian Marketing. The company would undergo a comprehensive client satisfaction audit, effective immediately. William was confident at first. Why wouldn't he be? He'd built strong client relationships, or so he thought. But what William didn't know was that Ray Sullivan had already been having quiet conversations with 3 of Meridian's major clients. Not threatening conversations. Not obvious ones. Just careful questions. Seeds of doubt planted professionally. Have you noticed any changes in leadership direction lately? How do you feel about the company's future vision? Just checking in. Are your needs being met? Within a week, all 3 clients cited concerns about leadership direction and put their contracts under review. William panicked. These were million-dollar accounts. His job depended on keeping them. He started working 16-hour days, desperately trying to salvage relationships that Eve was quietly, methodically dismantling from the shadows. Eve watched it all through Ray's reports. William looked exhausted in the surveillance photos, loosened tie, disheveled hair, dark circles under his eyes. The stress was showing. But Eve wasn't finished. Not even close. While William fought to save his reputation, Charlotte's world began to crack as well. Eve's second directive targeted Vanguard PR Agency. Immediate budget cuts of 30% across all departments, plus a full compliance and creative audit. Charlotte's entire division faced sudden scrutiny. The anonymous board representatives, lawyers Eve had hired, questioned everything. Campaign concepts Charlotte had championed were deemed off-brand and cancelled. Projects she'd spent months developing were shut down without explanation. Her creative vision, once celebrated, was now constantly criticized. Charlotte's team began to resent her leadership. Morale plummeted. The woman who'd built her career on confidence and praise started to wither under relentless criticism and rejection. Eve read the reports with satisfaction. She'd engineered something worse than firing: professional humiliation. The slow erosion of everything Charlotte had worked to build. By February 1st, the cracks in William and Charlotte's relationship had become fractures. Ray Sullivan's recordings, audio from the bugs he'd legally placed in William's office, and the listening devices near their apartment building, captured everything. The fights about money, the accusations, the blame. "This is your fault," William shouted in one recording. "You told me to take that aggressive approach with clients. You said it would show confidence. Don't you dare blame me for your failures." Charlotte shot back. "Maybe if you were actually competent, you wouldn't be losing every account you touch." Their extravagant wedding plans were the first casualty. The Hamptons' honeymoon, cancelled. The down payment on a luxury condo, lost. Charlotte's designer wardrobe budget, slashed. Every financial stress revealed new cracks in their foundation. The wedding that had been planned with such gleeful cruelty was becoming a source of bitter resentment. Eve listened to the recordings in her father's study, feeling nothing. And that emptiness worried her more than the revenge itself. One night, alone in Noah's house, surrounded by evidence of his secret life, Eve confronted what she was becoming. She'd orchestrated the destruction of 2 lives with clinical precision. She'd felt no guilt, no hesitation, only cold satisfaction. She reread her father's letter for the 100th time. "Use it wisely. Trust carefully. Love fearlessly." Was this wisdom? Was this justice? Or had she become someone Noah wouldn't recognize? Eve's reflection in the window showed a stranger, harder, colder, more powerful than the woman William had divorced. But also more alone, more lost. The revenge was working. But was it healing her? Or was it poisoning her from the inside out? She thought about her father, about his quiet life and hidden empire, about the way he'd lived with integrity despite having the resources to do anything, about the values he'd tried to instill in her. Had she won? Or had she lost herself? Before Eve could answer that question, an envelope arrived in the mail. An invitation. Engraved. Elegant. Expensive. The Manhattan Philanthropy Gala. Valentine's Day. The event coordinator had called earlier that week. "We've been trying to reach representatives of the Noah Harrison estate for some time," the woman explained. "Your father was a quiet but significant philanthropist. We'd like to honor him posthumously, and we'd be honored if his heir would attend to accept the recognition." Eve stared at the invitation. This was it. Her moment to step out of the shadows. To emerge not as William's ex-wife or Charlotte's former friend, but as someone entirely new. She called Marcus Jen. "Accept the invitation," she said, "and arrange for full press coverage. I want the New York Times, Forbes, Bloomberg, everyone." "Are you sure?" Marcus asked carefully. Eve smiled, a real smile, for the first time in weeks. "I'm sure. It's time they knew who I am." Eve had 14 days to prepare for the performance of her life. She hired a stylist who dressed Manhattan's elite, a media consultant who'd worked with CEOs and celebrities, a speechwriter who understood the language of power and philanthropy. She commissioned a gown, crimson silk that flowed like water, the color of power, not mourning. Diamond earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. Professional makeup that enhanced without masking. She rehearsed her speech about the Noah Harrison Foundation. $500 million in educational scholarships for underprivileged students. Her father's legacy transformed into institutional power that would outlast them all. She studied photos of Manhattan's elite so she'd recognize faces and know exactly who would be watching. Marcus Chen arranged interviews with society reporters. The publicity machine was warming up. Eve was no longer hiding. She was orchestrating her debut as a billionaire philanthropist. And somewhere across the city, William and Charlotte, recently unemployed, recently separated, had no idea what was coming. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Eve walked into the gilded ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. And every head turned. The crimson gown caught the light from a dozen chandeliers. Diamonds sparkled at her ears and throat. Her hair was swept up elegantly, her makeup flawless, her posture that of someone who owned half the room, because she did. Society photographers swarmed. Flashbulbs exploded. Whispers rippled through the crowd like electricity. Who is she? That's Noah Harrison's daughter. I heard she inherited billions. She's gorgeous. Is she single? At the back of the ballroom, barely visible near the coat check, stood William and Charlotte. He wore a tuxedo that was 3 years old and slightly tight. She wore a dress from last season, her makeup done herself instead of professionally. They'd come because William's former colleagues had sent them pity invitations. They were here to see their old world, to remember what they'd had before everything fell apart. They had no idea they were about to see the architect of their downfall. William's face went white when he recognized Eve. Charlotte's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. But Eve didn't acknowledge them. Didn't even glance in their direction. Her power was so absolute, so complete, that she didn't need to. Her presence alone devastated them more than any confrontation could. She moved through the crowd like she'd been born to it, greeting philanthropists, shaking hands with CEOs, laughing with city council members. This was her world now. They were just ghosts haunting its edges. When the MC announced the evening's keynote donor, Eve walked to the podium with perfect confidence. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "My name is Eve Harrison, and I'm here to honor my father, Noah Harrison." The room was utterly still. My father lived simply. He drove an old car. He clipped coupons. He never wore expensive clothes or took lavish vacations. To most people, he appeared ordinary. Eve paused, letting the words settle. But my father understood something that many people never learn. True wealth isn't what you spend. It's what you build, and what you build with it. She gestured to the screen behind her, where Noah's photo appeared. For 40 years, my father quietly built an empire. Not for himself. He didn't want the mansions or the yachts. He built it for a purpose. To create opportunities for people who, like him, came from nothing and had everything to prove. Eve's voice strengthened. Tonight, I'm announcing the Noah Harrison Foundation. $500 million dedicated to educational scholarships for students from underserved communities. Students who have the talent, the drive, and the character to change the world, but lack only the opportunity. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. Eve continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. My father taught me that power comes in many forms. Some people use power to hurt, to betray, to take advantage of others when they're vulnerable. She paused, and though she didn't look at William and Charlotte, everyone who knew them understood exactly what she was saying. But the greatest power is the power to heal, to build, to lift others up instead of tearing them down. That's the legacy I intend to honor. That's the kind of power I choose to wield. The applause was thunderous. People stood. Society photographers captured every angle. The New York Times reporter's pen flew across her notepad. Eve had rewritten her story. No longer the abandoned wife. No longer the grieving daughter. She was Eve Harrison, billionaire philanthropist, and she'd done it all in front of the two people who'd tried to destroy her. As guests surrounded Eve with congratulations, William made a choice that would define his character forever. He pushed through the crowd, his face desperate, his eyes pleading. "Eve," he said, his voice cracking. "Eve, please. I need to talk to you." The crowd parted. Silence fell. Everyone watched. Eve turned slowly, her expression neutral. "William." He looked smaller somehow. Diminished. His tuxedo hung awkwardly. His hairline had receded from stress. I didn't know. We didn't know." Charlotte appeared behind him, mascara smudged, unable to meet Eve's eyes. William continued, his voice shaking. "If I had known about your father, about the money, I never would have." He stopped, realizing how that sounded. How it revealed everything about who he really was. Eve smiled. Not with cruelty. Not with anger. But with the kind of grace that comes from complete, absolute power. "No, you didn't," she said quietly. "You saw a grieving woman and thought she was weak. You thought I was broken. Someone to be discarded when I was no longer convenient." William opened his mouth, but no words came. "But my father taught me something, William. He taught me that strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It simply is." Eve turned to Charlotte, who flinched under her gaze. "I hope you find what you're looking for. Both of you. I really do." She walked away, leaving them standing in the middle of the ballroom with the weight of their choices crushing down on them. The crowd filled the space she'd left, conversations resuming, the moment already becoming gossip that would spread through Manhattan's social circles for months. Eve didn't look back. She left the ballroom, descended the plaza's grand steps, and climbed into the car Marcus had waiting. As they drove away, she could hear Charlotte's broken sob echoing in her memory. But she felt nothing, and that terrified her. 2 days after the gala, Ray Sullivan delivered his final report. Eve read it in her father's study, a glass of wine untouched beside her. William had been terminated from Meridian Marketing. The board had seen the photos from the gala. Eve Harrison, the majority stakeholder, the woman William had divorced. They'd put the pieces together. The client losses, the failed audits, the mysterious board directives. They'd fired him to protect the company from whatever revenge plot they assumed was happening. They weren't wrong. Charlotte's position at Vanguard had been eliminated in restructuring. Budget cuts, they said. Performance issues. She'd been escorted from the building with her belongings in a cardboard box. Their relationship had ended 3 days ago. A screaming match outside their apartment building, so loud that neighbors called the police. The fairy tale built on betrayal had collapsed into rubble. William had moved back in with his mother. Charlotte had moved to a studio in Queens. Both were unemployed, blacklisted in their industries, and alone. Eve had won. Completely. Devastatingly. The revenge she'd orchestrated so perfectly had worked exactly as planned. So why did she feel hollow? She looked around her father's study. At the modest furniture he'd never replaced despite having billions. At the old photographs on the walls. At his letter, now worn from being read hundreds of times. Use it wisely. Trust carefully. Love fearlessly. Had she used it wisely? She'd used it effectively. But wisely. Eve set down the report and made a series of phone calls. First, to Marcus Chen. Sell Meridian Marketing and Vanguard PR Agency. Immediately. I want them off my books within 60 days. Sell them. Marcus sounded surprised. But you own controlling stakes. I don't want to own the companies that employ my enemies anymore, Eve said firmly. I want to be free of them. Sell them. Donate the proceeds to domestic violence shelters and mental health organizations. Understood, Marcus said quietly. Second, to her financial advisors. The Noah Harrison Foundation. I want to expand it. International scholarships. Funding for women-owned startups. Venture capital for overlooked entrepreneurs. I want my father's fortune to do what he would have wanted. Create opportunities for people who deserve them. Third, to Ray Sullivan. End all surveillance on William Hartley and Charlotte Pierce. Delete the files. I'm done. They're not worth another moment of my time or energy. She hung up and sat in silence. Outside, dawn was breaking over Brooklyn. Birds were singing. The world was waking up to a new day. Eve burned the surveillance reports in her father's fireplace. Watched the photos curl and blacken. Let the smoke carry away the last evidence of her obsession. The revenge was over. The real work was beginning. Spring turned to summer. Eve threw herself into the foundation with the same intensity she'd once used for vengeance. But this felt different. This felt right. She opened scholarship centers in underserved communities. Funded women-owned startups that traditional investors had dismissed. Traveled to speak at universities about resilience, loss, and the power of transforming pain into purpose. The media couldn't get enough of her. CNN featured her in a profile about next-generation philanthropists. Forbes named her one of the year's most influential business leaders. Bloomberg covered her innovative approaches to venture capital. But she wasn't doing it for the attention. She was doing it because every scholarship she awarded, every business she funded, every life she touched, it healed something inside her that revenge had only broken further. She was still alone. Still grieving Noah. Still processing William's betrayal. But she was building something meaningful. Something her father would have been proud of. 1 year to the day after Noah died, Eve returned to the place where everything began. December 20th arrived again. 1 full year since Eve had lost her father. Since her world had ended and begun again. Eve walked into Noah's favorite coffee shop. A modest place in Brooklyn called Chen's Corner. Her father had come here every Sunday for 30 years. Mrs. Chen, the owner, recognized Eve from the news coverage. "Your father would have been so proud," Mrs. Chen said, her eyes warm. "He talked about you constantly. Always said you had his stubborn heart." Eve ordered Noah's usual, black coffee and a blueberry scone. She sat at his corner table by the window, the table she discovered later he'd donated money to preserve when the shop almost closed 5 years ago. She watched the neighborhood Noah had loved, the streets he'd walked, the community he'd quietly protected. Eve had discovered, while going through his records, that he'd bought the entire block to prevent gentrification, and never told a soul. That was Noah. Power used so quietly it was almost invisible. Eve thought about the year. The discovery of billions. The betrayal. The revenge. The foundation. The transformation. All of it. As she sipped her coffee, the door chimed. Eve looked up and froze. Charlotte stood in the doorway. She looked different. Diminished. No designer clothes, just discount store jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair was in a plain ponytail. No makeup. No confidence. She looked like someone who'd been broken and was slowly trying to piece herself back together. Charlotte didn't notice Eve at first. She ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu and sat alone at a table near the back, scrolling through job listings on her phone. Then she looked up. Her eyes met Eve's. The color drained from her face. For a moment, neither woman moved. The past hung between them like smoke. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. She stood abruptly, grabbing her coffee, clearly intending to flee. But Eve surprised herself. "Charlotte," she said quietly. Charlotte froze. Eve gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit." I can't." Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't deserve." "Sit," Eve repeated more firmly. Charlotte hesitated, then slowly walked over and sat down. She couldn't meet Eve's eyes. Her hands trembled around her paper cup. The silence stretched between them. Uncomfortable, heavy, loaded with everything that had happened. Finally, Charlotte spoke. "I'm sorry." The words came out broken. "I know it doesn't matter. I know it doesn't change anything. But I'm sorry. For all of it." Eve studied her former friend. She waited for anger to rise. For satisfaction at seeing Charlotte so defeated. For the vindication she'd imagined this moment would bring. But she felt none of it. Just a distant sadness for who they'd both been and who they'd become. "What happened to you?" Eve asked, not unkindly. Charlotte's tears spilled over. "I lost my job. My reputation. William left me 3 months after the wedding. Said I'd ruined his life." She laughed bitterly. "I live in a studio in Queens. I can barely afford rent. No one in the industry will hire me. Everyone knows what I did." She finally looked up at Eve. "I destroyed everything. My career, my friendships, my integrity. And for what? A man who abandoned me the moment things got hard. Just like he abandoned you." Eve nodded slowly. "Yes, he did." "Were you behind it?" Charlotte asked quietly. "Everything that happened to us? The job losses, the audits, the clients leaving?" Eve didn't answer immediately. She thought about lying, about denying it. But what was the point? "Yes," she said simply. Charlotte nodded, as if she'd expected that. "I would have done the same thing," she whispered. "If I were you, I would have done so much worse." Eve picked up her father's blueberry scone and broke it in half. The gesture felt symbolic somehow. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Charlotte. I really do." Charlotte stared at her, confused. "That's it? That's all you have to say to me? What else is there?" Eve asked gently. "You made your choices. I made mine. We both have to live with them." Charlotte's face crumpled. "I don't know how. I don't know how to live with what I did to you." Eve stood, leaving money on the table for both their coffees. "One day at a time," she said. "One choice at a time. That's all any of us can do." She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, Charlotte, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." Charlotte whispered "thank you" through her tears, but Eve was already gone. Outside, Eve walked slowly through the Brooklyn streets. She realized something important. Charlotte's apology meant nothing. It didn't undo the betrayal, didn't heal the wound, didn't change history. But Eve's reaction to it revealed everything. She wasn't defined by what had been done to her anymore. She didn't need Charlotte's remorse or William's regret. She didn't even need them to suffer anymore. Their choices had destroyed them. Her choices had rebuilt her. That was the difference. Closure, Eve realized, wasn't a moment. It wasn't something someone else could give you. It was a practice, a daily choice to carry your wounds without being broken by them. She would always carry what happened, but she'd learned to carry it differently. Eve walked to the one place she'd been avoiding for a year. The cemetery where Noah was buried. The Brooklyn cemetery was quiet, covered in fallen leaves. December wind moved through the bare trees. Eve found Noah's grave easily. She'd memorized its location even though she hadn't been able to visit. The gravestone was simple granite. Just his name, his dates, and one line: he built empires but valued people. Eve knelt, placing the second half of the blueberry scone on the grave. A silly gesture, but Noah would have appreciated it. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "It's been a year." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery. Eve pulled her coat tighter. "I found the safety deposit box. Found the fortune you left me. Found out you were a secret billionaire who lived like you were broke." She smiled through tears. "Very you." She traced his name on the stone. "I used the money, Dad, but I'm not sure I used it wisely. Not at first, anyway." The words came flooding out. About William's betrayal. About Charlotte's cruelty. About the revenge she'd orchestrated. About destroying their careers and their relationship. About the darkness that had lived inside her for months. "I hurt them, Dad. I destroyed them. And I felt nothing. I became someone cold and calculating and powerful." Her voice broke. "Was that what you meant by use it wisely? Was that the lesson?" The wind was her only answer. "I don't know if you'd be proud of me or disappointed. I don't know if I did the right thing or if I let the betrayal turn me into someone you wouldn't recognize." Eve wiped her tears. "But I'm trying now. The foundation, the scholarships, the businesses I'm funding. I'm trying to honor what you built, to use the power the way you would have wanted." She stood, preparing to leave, when something caught her eye. The angle of the light had shifted. Eve walked around to the back of the gravestone and gasped. There was an inscription she'd never seen. Hidden on the reverse side, engraved in smaller letters. "For Eve, the greatest wealth is knowing who you are when everything is taken away." Below it, a date. The date Noah had commissioned the stone. 3 weeks before he died. He knew. He knew he was dying. Knew he'd leave her billions. Knew she'd face tests. This was his final lesson, carved in stone, waiting for her to be ready to receive it. Eve sank to her knees, her hand pressed against the cold granite. Her father's last gift wasn't the money. It was the question. Who was she when everything was taken away? Not William's wife. Not Charlotte's friend. Not even Noah Harrison's daughter. Just Eve. And in that stripping away, in that crucible of loss and betrayal and choice, she discovered strength she didn't know existed. She discovered who she really was. The betrayal hadn't broken her. The billions hadn't defined her. She had defined herself. Eve traced the words with her fingers, crying and laughing at the same time. "You sneaky old man," she whispered. "You planned this whole thing, didn't you?" The wind seemed to laugh with her. She stayed there for a long time, talking to her father, feeling his presence in a way she hadn't since he died. When she finally left, she felt lighter. Not healed. Healing wasn't linear, but different. Changed. Evolved. Walking through the cemetery gates into the winter sunlight, Eve understood something fundamental. Noah hadn't just left her a test. He'd left her a gift. The gift of agency. The gift of choice. The gift of discovering her own power. She could have used the fortune for comfort, for luxury, for endless revenge. Instead, she'd chosen to use it for purpose. And that choice, that transformation, was his real legacy. 6 months later, Eve stood in her new office overlooking Manhattan, preparing for an interview that would tell the world her story on her terms. The 60 Minutes correspondent sat across from Eve in her foundation's headquarters. Cameras rolled. Lights blazed. This was the interview everyone had been waiting for. The billionaire heiress finally speaking publicly about the betrayal that had captivated the tabloids. "Your ex-husband left you days after your father died," the interviewer began. "Then you inherited billions. Many people call what happened next the perfect revenge. But you've never commented publicly. Did you orchestrate William Hartley and Charlotte Pierce's downfall?" Eve had known this question was coming. She'd rehearsed diplomatic non-answers with her publicist. But sitting there, with the cameras recording and the truth waiting to be told, she made a different choice. "Yes," she said simply. "I did." The interviewer's eyes widened slightly. "Can you elaborate?" "I discovered I owned controlling stakes in the companies where they worked. I used that power to make their professional lives extremely difficult. I orchestrated client losses, budget cuts, audits. I wanted them to suffer the way I'd suffered." Eve's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "I used my inheritance as a weapon, and it worked exactly as I planned. Do you regret it?" Eve paused, choosing her words carefully. "I regret the darkness it brought into my heart, the person I became during those months. I don't regret protecting myself or using the tools I had available, but I regret how much of myself I lost in the process." "The line between justice and vengeance," Eve continued, "is thinner than we'd like to believe. I crossed it. I walked through that darkness. And eventually, I came back. That journey taught me more about who I am than staying on the right side ever would have." The interviewer leaned forward. "Would you do it differently if you could go back?" Eve smiled sadly. "I'd like to think so. But I'm not sure the woman who lost everything in 1 week, her father, her husband, her best friend, could have made different choices. I needed to walk through that darkness to understand what power really means. To understand who I am beneath everything else." "And who are you?" "Someone who's still figuring that out," Eve admitted. "But someone who's trying to use power to build instead of destroy. Someone who honors her father's legacy by investing in people, not punishing them. Someone who learned that the hardest person to forgive is often yourself." After the cameras stopped rolling, the interviewer asked one final question off the record. "Are you happy, Eve?" Eve considered it. "I'm not sure happiness is the right word. I'm purposeful. I'm whole. I'm no longer defined or broken by what happened to me." She gestured around the office, at the wall of photos showing scholarship recipients, funded entrepreneurs, communities transformed. "I wake up every day knowing I'm building something that matters. That my father's empire is helping people he never met. That his values are living through institutions that will outlast us both." "Am I happy?" "Sometimes." "Am I at peace?" "Getting there." "Is that enough?" Eve nodded slowly. "Yes." Because I finally understand that the love story I needed to write wasn't about finding someone else. It was about finding myself. The interviewer smiled. That's beautiful. It's true, Eve said. And truth is more important than beauty. That night, Eve returned to Chen's corner one last time. But this time, she wasn't alone. Eve sat at Noah's corner table with 3 people who'd become her chosen family over the past year. Marcus Chen, her attorney-turned-foundation director, who'd helped her navigate the legal complexities of power. Diane Porter, her forensic accountant-turned-CFO, who'd shown her exactly what she owned and how to use it wisely. And Mrs. Chen, the coffee shop owner, who Noah had quietly supported for decades and who now served on the Foundation's Community Advisory Board. They were planning the Foundation's next expansion: affordable housing. Buying buildings to prevent displacement, just like Noah had done with this entire block. Creating communities, not just providing charity. Your father would be proud, Marcus said, reviewing the projections. This is exactly the kind of long-term thinking he specialized in. He was a genius, Diane added. Most billionaires want monuments with their names on them. Noah wanted change that outlasted his name entirely. Mrs. Chen patted Eve's hand. He was proud of you before any of this happened. He used to sit right here and talk about how kind you were. How genuine. The money was just money. You were his real treasure. Eve felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for telling me that. As they talked and planned and laughed, a young woman approached their table hesitantly. She was maybe 22, wearing scrubs from the hospital down the street. "Excuse me," she said nervously. "Are you Eve Harrison?" "I am," Eve said, smiling. "I'm Alicia Reeves. I'm one of your scholarship recipients. I just finished my first year of medical school." Tears filled the young woman's eyes. "You changed my life. I was working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, about to give up on my dream. And then I got your scholarship. You saved me." Eve stood and hugged her. "You saved yourself, Alicia. You did the hard work. I just helped remove one obstacle." "Can I tell you something?" Alicia asked. "Of course. I come from nothing. My mom cleaned houses. My dad left when I was 5. I grew up in the projects in the Bronx. Every guidance counselor told me to be realistic, to aim lower, that medical school wasn't for girls like me." Alicia's voice strengthened. "But your foundation didn't just give me money. It gave me permission to believe I belonged. That's worth more than the tuition." Eve's throat tightened. "That's exactly what my father would have wanted." After Alicia left, Eve sat back down, overwhelmed. Marcus raised his coffee cup. "This," he said, "this is what wealth is for." They all toasted, to Noah, to purpose, to building things that mattered. As everyone prepared to leave, Mrs. Chen pulled Eve aside. "There's something I never told you. About your father." "What is it?" "He came in here the day before he went into the hospital. He knew something was wrong. He sat at this table and wrote something." Mrs. Chen pulled out a folded napkin, yellowed with age. "He asked me to give this to you when I thought you were ready. I think you're ready now." Eve unfolded the napkin. Noah's handwriting filled it. "Eve, if you're reading this, you've survived the worst year of your life. You've probably made mistakes, done things you regret, discovered you're capable of both darkness and light. Good. That means you're human. That means you've lived. Remember, wealth is just a tool. It amplifies who you already are. If you're cruel, it makes you a tyrant. If you're kind, it makes you powerful. Choose kindness. Choose purpose. Choose to build. And remember one more thing. You are my greatest wealth. Not the money. You. The person you are. The person you're becoming. I'm proud of you, not for what you'll accomplish, but for who you are underneath it all. Love yourself the way I loved you. Fiercely. Without conditions. Dad. Eve pressed the napkin to her chest, crying openly now. Her father's final message. His real inheritance. Not billions. Not power. Just love. Just permission to be human. To make mistakes. To find her way. That night, alone in the empty coffee shop after everyone left, Eve stood before Noah's photo on the wall. She touched the frame gently. I understand now, Dad. You didn't leave me money. You left me a choice. And I chose to become someone you'd be proud of. Someone I'm proud of. She smiled through her tears. William and Charlotte? They're just chapters in my story now. Not the story itself. You taught me that. You taught me that true power doesn't announce itself with speeches or confrontations. It simply is. Quiet. Steady. Purposeful. Eve took a deep breath. Thank you for the empire. But more than that, thank you for teaching me I didn't need it to be whole. I just needed to know myself. To choose myself. To love myself enough to become who I was meant to be. She touched the photo one more time. I'm going to make you proud, Dad. Every day. With every choice. With every person I help. With every life I touch. Your legacy will live on. Not in buildings with your name on them. But in people whose lives are better because you existed. Eve walked out into the December night. The city lights reflected off buildings her father had built but never boasted about. The streets hummed with the lives of people he'd helped without ever seeking recognition. She didn't look back. She moved forward, into her purpose, into her power, into the person she'd been forged into through loss and betrayal and choice. A year ago, Eve had lost everything. Her father, her husband, her best friend, her old identity. But in losing everything, she'd found something infinitely more valuable, herself. True power, she'd learned, doesn't announce itself. It simply is. Silent, steady, transformative. And betrayal? Betrayal breaks the weak. But it builds the strong. 1 year after the worst day of her life, Eve Harrison had become someone new. Not because of the billions she inherited, but because of the choices she made with them. She learned that revenge feels hollow. That power without purpose is just cruelty. That the greatest love story isn't always about finding someone else. Sometimes it's about finding yourself. Her father left her an empire. But his real gift was the question, who are you when everything is taken away? Eve answered that question not with words, but with actions. With scholarships that changed lives. With investments that built communities. With choices that honored character over comfort. William and Charlotte became footnotes in her story. The betrayal that nearly destroyed her became the catalyst that revealed who she really was. And Noah Harrison's legacy? It lives on. Not in monuments or buildings with his name carved in stone. But in every person whose life is better because his daughter chose to build instead of destroy. To heal instead of hurt. To transform pain into purpose. True power is silent. Betrayal breaks the weak but builds the strong. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't money at all. It's the wisdom to know who you are when everything else is stripped away. The Noah Harrison Foundation has awarded 1,247 scholarships and funded 89 businesses in its first year. If Eve's journey resonated with you, if you've experienced betrayal that changed you, or loss that revealed your strength, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if you'd like more stories about resilience, second chances, and the power of choosing who you become, please subscribe and click the bell. Your next chapter is waiting. Remember, you are not defined by what happens to you. You're defined by what you do next. Thank you for listening to Eve's story. Until next time.